I have created a new shelf called Rig Demo. So the first thing I'm going to add is delete by type history. And remember, it's a Control, Shift, and a click. Adds it to the shelf. I'm going to add create polygon primitives. I'm going to add a cube and a cylinder. And I'm clicking the option box so that I get the option box when I create these. Also, I'm going to go to create curve tools. There's Bezier, control vertice, EP curves. EP is really the easiest one to use for these. So I'm going to add EP curve tool. I'm also going to add select hierarchy. And I'm going to go to modify, and I want freeze transforms. Probably one of the most important things you do in rigging. Reset transforms and center pivot. Okay, so this is enough to get me started. The first thing I'm going to talk about are transforms. Okay, so if I wanted to make a transform, I could go to create an empty group. Okay, and that creates a null transform. So if we look over here, we've got all of the familiar keyable elements that you'll see any other object have. So a transform, if I select it and then hit the W key for move, you can see it here. So I can move it, I can rotate it, and essentially a transform is just, it's an empty group. It's like a placeholder, but it is a place in space. Okay, now I could always reset it, put it back to the origin. And I could always rename it. I could use it as a container to house other items. But I just wanted you to understand what a transform was. Now also, if I were to create a cube, now it says here this is polycube 1. You'll see here that polycube 1 has the same transform information in your channel box as any other transform. But if we go to the attribute editor, it's Windows, General Editor's attribute editor. You can also access it by Control A. It's probably a hotkey you should know. Now here it says P-cube shape. So I've selected the object, which is selecting the P-cube 1, but in the attribute editor, I'm in the P-cube shape tab. So these are like hierarchies of different elements of an object. P-cube shape has to do with geometry stuff, how the geometry is rendered, things like that. So the shape is the actual geometry. If we go to P-cube 1, that's the transform, and it's like the top node. And by default, Maya only shows the top node when you're selecting things. So I just wanted you to be aware that, and so as we see here, P-cube 1, so you're actually selecting the transform node when you're interacting with objects. Now with the transform, we can, again, we can move it. When you're dealing with an object, you can reset it. Now also when you're dealing with objects and transforms, again transforms really important to manage, because as we move this around, you can see we have these values here, and If I, in the rigging process, if I needed this element to be right here in space, then I would freeze the transforms. Now when you're rigging, you always want to freeze the transforms on just about everything. I cannot overstate that enough. Virtually 95 to 99% of any problem I've ever seen in a rig is because transforms were not frozen when the rig was developed. Okay, so I've moved things around again, so I've got these values. If I freeze the transforms, it's now zeroed out or frozen. Now I can also reset the transforms, and so the transform also acts like a pivot point. So if I rotated the object, I'm moving around its transform or pivot. Okay. Same thing with scale. We'll scale from that pivot. And again, all of these things you can see what's happening to them in the channel box. So channel box is really important when you're animating and rigging. Now I can also manually reset things. So if I select the top value, okay, so select it again, hold, and just drag down with the left mouse. I can come down to translate and rotate and just type in a 0, enter, and that'll reset everything. Now in terms of the scale, I can also reset the scale, but with scale, rarely want the scale at 0, generally want the scale at 1. And so that would be like a perfectly reset element. Now something else that's handy with transforms, you can also center the pivot. So I select my cube, and what it's going to do is put the pivot or the transform in the very center of the selected geometry. And that could also include multiple pieces of geometry if they were all selected. So center pivot. Now this puts it right back where it was when I created the cube. And then if I say reset transform, whoops, let's do that again. Center pivot, let's freeze it. So something else you can do, we can, on your selected geometry, including multiples, you can say center pivot. So now my pivot point is right back where I started from. So now what I could do is I could use the snapping, and if you don't see this window here, or these icons, then you might see this one, so you would just expand it. So this will snap to grid, curve, and point. You can also just hold down the X for the grid, hold down the C for curves, or a V for point. Okay, so I'm going to hold down the X key, and then left click and drag right there to the center point on the grid. Then I can freeze transforms, and I'm right back where I started as far as transforms go with the cube. Something else I could do to change the pivot, if I tap the D key, I'm now in this pivot mode. Tap it again and I'm out. The insert key works the same way, so either D or insert. So if I go to pivot mode, I could then come down to vertice and move this to the vertice on the cube, and D again. And then I could go to rotate, and so then I could rotate this cube around that pivot point.